Unit 1.2, properties of real numbers. Again, we'll go fairly quickly because we covered some of it in our review. But we actually use most of these properties already. We just don't know what they're called, right? So I'm going to tell you what it's called, what it is, and then one or two examples so you can see what it looks like. All right, so commutative property of addition or multiplication. If it says of addition or multiplication, that means this only applies to addition and multiplication, right? So the main idea is that the order of the values does not matter, right? Commutative property says the order of the values does not matter, and that's why it only applies to addition and multiplication, because with subtraction and division, the order does matter. All right, so for example, commutative property says that 5 plus 7 equals 12. The order doesn't matter. 7 plus 5 also equals 12, right? Or 3 times 2 equals 6, and 2 times 3 equals 6. The order doesn't matter. All right, the next one, associative property, basically says that what numbers you associate don't matter, right? Also with addition and multiplication, right? The grouping of the values doesn't matter, right? The grouping, I don't know how you spell grouping. The grouping of the values does not matter. So, for example, if you're going to add 6 plus 6 plus 4, right? You can group it any way you want. You can either do 6 plus 6 plus 4, which is 16, or, because your brain likes tens better, do 6 plus 6 plus 4, right? Because 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 6 is 16. So when you're dealing with addition or multiplication, you can group numbers differently, right? So for example, 3 times 7 times 4, that's already going to be complicated, right? But you can group them. Because it's all multiplication, you can change. You can group different ones together. You can either do the 3 by 7 first, which is 21, and then do the times 4, right? Or you can do the 3 after you do the 7 times 4. Or you can do 7 times 3 times 4, and you will get the same answer all the way. In my opinion, this one's the easiest, because 3 times 4 is 12, times 7 is going to be 84. It was easier for me to do this one. You decide which one's easier for you, and that's how you group things, right? The grouping of the values doesn't matter. If it's all positive, or all addition, or if it's all multiplication. Do what works for your brain. Your brain does this automatically, but you just didn't know it had a name. All right, and then identity property. Identity property says when you're dealing with addition or subtraction that it stays the same. Right? So when you're dealing with addition, 4 plus 0 is still 4. Identity property says you can add or subtract 0 from anything and change nothing. Right? Identity property also says if you multiply something by 1, it changes nothing. Identity property says if you add 0 or multiply by 1, it changes nothing. It stays the same. Inverse property of addition or multiplication says you can use the opposite of something to cancel the value. right? You can use the opposite of something to cancel the value, right? So if you want to get rid of an A, then you would subtract an A, and that would give you 0, right? If you wanted to get rid of A by multiplication, then you could multiply it by, right? And that would give you A over A, which is 1. Anything over itself is 1, right? So you're basically canceling it out. You're getting rid of it, right? So let's do this without the letters. Say you had 5 and you wanted to get rid of it. Well, you do the opposite. You subtract 5. That gives you 0. Say you had 1/4 and you wanted to get rid of it. Multiply it by its opposite. Flip it over and multiply. You're going to end up with 4 over 4, which is 1. Opposites. It's called the inverse property. All right, property of 0. We all know the property of 0. Multiplying by 0 always equals 0. It doesn't matter what you're multiplying, honey. If you multiply it by 0, the answer is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. 4 times 0 is 0. 1/4 times 0 is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Let's go crazy. 6 plus 12 times 15 minus 2 times 25 times 0 is 0. It doesn't matter. If you're multiplying it times 0, it's 0. Distributive property says that you can multiply a value to an expression inside the parentheses. All right, so what does this mean? What does this mean? Sometimes, look, so suppose you have 3, 2 plus 6. Easy enough, right? 6 plus 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. You're asking, what do I need distributive property for? All I have to do is add what's inside the parentheses and then multiply, right? That's what the order of operations tells me to do. But here's the thing. We're starting to play with variables, right? So what if you had 3 times x plus 6? All right, so my camera cut off for some reason. Don't worry, I'll continue where I left off. Somewhere in distributive property, right? Multiply a value to an expression inside the parentheses. And we were talking about why we needed to do this, right? Well, what if there is a variable inside the parentheses? Well, we can't combine these, which would be our first step on order of operations, right? We can't, because they're not like terms. One is a variable and one is a number. You can't combine them. So we use distributive property to multiply what's outside the parentheses. 3 times x is 3x. When you're multiplying a number and a variable, you just mash them together. There's an implied multiplication. There's an invisible multiplication sign in between the 3 and the x. So 3 times x is just 3x, and then 3 times 6 is just 18. So we use distributive property to distribute something inside the parentheses when we can't do the other stuff inside the parentheses. Right? Mostly because there's a variable in the way. I mean, technically you could have multiple variables, right? So suppose you had a times b plus c. Well, you can't really do anything. There are all kinds of different variables. They're not like terms. But you could distribute. A times b is ab. A times c is ac. So it would be a times b plus a times c. Invisible multiplication again. Right? So that's distributive property.